I think it's safe to say a lot of folks in the United States, and for that matter, across the world, were pretty shocked at those images we saw just a few days ago, unarmed, peaceful protesters being rushed, forcibly driven from the area around the White House, and then that was followed by low-flying choppers. I want to get your reaction to all of this.
Yes, Mike, I think it was very shocking. One, because we're not used to seeing a president or any government official use the tools and apparatus of the U.S. military on civilians, not only civilians, but civilians that were peacefully protesting. So we expect to see this in other states. We criticize Saddam Hussein for doing things to his own people, but it seems that Trump has taken this position of being a semi-dictator, one that is willing to flex his muscles, flex his military power for a show of strength and not for anything that's positive for the country, positive for the protesters, or in honor of George Floyd.
Yeah, I want to get your reaction to something I was just talking to Nathan about. You know, he's threatening to deploy the Army, but you have this list of rather distinguished military leaders. Most of them, when they retire, stay silent about this sort of thing, but they're denouncing him. Nathan and I were just talking about Jim Mattis, who's the former defense secretary, but there's also retired Admiral Mike Mullen, retired General John Allen. How does that change things, do you think? Does it figure into the calculus at all?
I don't think it figures into the calculus for Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is a person that does what he wants to do. He shoots from the hip and doesn't really take advice. But I do think it's a positive development because usually the case that retired military do not criticize the current administration, not criticize a current administration so harshly. And I think that type of criticism from both retired military and current military is going to be necessary to shift the tide. Because it's one thing for Donald Trump to do what he wants, but for him to have power, for him to flex his muscles, he has to have muscle behind him. So if the muscle turns, i.e. the military, there will be a change. And hopefully persons who are respected in the military that are retired, who are sending this message, that message will be received by the rank and file who recognize or can recognize that the things that the president is asking them to do goes against their oath and goes against their understanding of themselves as defenders of this country.
There is a man who used to be in uniform, now he's in the U.S. Senate, Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, who wrote this op-ed in the New York Times basically advocating send in the military. What's your reaction to that?
I think it's shameful. I think Tom Cotton is talking about his own constituents, which is problematic. He was elected to represent people in his state and represent the American people more broadly. I think it's the abdication of his office to advocate using military force against American citizens. I think he should be ashamed. I think he should be censured by Congress as well.
And I want to get one last thought from you. Mark Esper seemed to be in Trump's corner, sort of broke with him just the other day about the Insurrection Act. What are your thoughts on him?
I think he's completely right. The Insurrection Act is primarily aimed at domestic terrorism and threats to the United States. So if it was the case that a state or state militia was attempting to significantly break from the United States or set themselves up as enemies of the United States, I think Insurrection Act may be called for. But we see nothing like that now. We see peaceful protesters who are protesting a government overreach, protesting a clear injustice that most Americans think is a clear injustice. So to call this peaceful protest an insurrection, to me, is an abdication by President Trump of his duty. President Trump swore to not just represent one segment of the population, but to represent the American people. So to call on the Insurrection Act is to basically label American citizens enemies of the state when they are just simply exercising their First Amendment rights.